Okay, well, my name's Brian Bartlow. I've been in EMS since 1990. Became a paramedic in 95, EMT-2 prior to that. So I spent 1 year as an EMT, and then I spent a couple years as an EMT-2, and then I went to paramedic school. And I've worked for multiple companies, Lake County, Fresno, and I've worked as a firefighter, paramedic. That's where I pretty much started my career, as a firefighter, EMT, firefighter, EMT-2, firefighter, paramedic. Then I worked for the local ambulance company as a paramedic, and then I moved down to Fresno to work for a helicopter service down there. So, and then I'm back up here now, working for a fire department. 90 to now, yeah, so 25 and a half years, 26 years. There's definitely calls that I've been on that I'd like to forget. But I mean, it's part of the job, and I could have quit a long time ago. The hardest ones are the kids, hearing parents screams and cries over their dead kids. And so I think not necessarily seeing dead kids, but because I have kids, I think it's the parents' reaction. It's the parents' screeches and their nightmare of how do you deal with knowing your kid was squashed or dead for whatever reason, and then how do you live? How do you want to do anything? How can you ever smile again? I don't know. If my kids died, man, I couldn't picture my motorcycle racing or whatever I do to get away from that stuff. I don't know what would work. So I do use my motorcycle riding to get away, to kind of offset any of the drama that goes on in my head that I have a lot. And that helps a lot. And playing with my kids and making my wife happy and playing on the property on my tractor and doing stuff, that kind of keeps me normal, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I think it was several years into me understanding EMS, so maybe mid-90s, I heard of what post-traumatic stress, and it was not in the EMS side. It was from war, veterans seeing it on TV. I think in the 90s it was big. It was post-traumatic stress, and they had all these fundraisers and Vietnam vet help centers and everything. That's the thing but I never really related it to EMS because we're not in the war, so I thought. I think, and when I started feeling emotions, it was probably after I moved to Fresno. I had a couple calls here in Lake County before I moved down there that were bothersome, but it wasn't really keeping me up at night. I was thinking about him, and I was like, man, that poor kid died. Or I think by that time, before I moved to Fresno, one of the most traumatic ones that I had was a kid that was eviscerated, pretty much broke in half from his waist. I mean, completely broke in half, still alive. And his guts were everywhere. He knew he was going to die. He knew it. He was 22 years old, coming up from the Bay Area. He had presents on his bike because it was his mom's birthday. And he was coming up, and some drunk lady pulled out of Canocti Harbor onto the main highway, drunk on oncoming traffic. And he was on his motorcycle. And the car came into the motorcycle, and he went over the bars, but probably got caught up between the bike bars, the mangled mess, and it just cut him in half. Literally, legs were, I mean, he was a mess. So that was probably one of the most dramatic calls that I've been on. And then hearing him say, I know I'm going to die, and he was very calm, not in any pain, and he had his guts everywhere, his legs were broke, and he ended up, kept saying that I know I'm going to die, and he wanted me to make sure that his mom got his presents. And I was in shock seeing all this. This was the first time I saw that much guts on a live person, somebody talking to me. And so that one probably was the first one that really got me to think about life. Really think about life. What could happen from some drunk lady? And she had no clue what was going on. She was over there laughing and saying, oh, she just didn't know what was going on. And and this kid was dying, and he ended up dying for sure. But that's, I think, when I first, like I said, really felt like a depression, or yeah, it was a depression, I think, because I was thinking, how could people do that to somebody else and then not even care, not even know what would happen? So it just kind of made me open my eyes a little bit to life. But then Fresno is when it really hit me. Yeah, so getting help after certain calls sometimes is required by the fire departments, or not required, but it's offered. Hey, this was a bad call. You know, we have a counselor coming in. I remember I probably avoided 6 to 8 of those offers, thinking I don't need it. But those 6 or 8 calls still affect me. I still think about them. I still remember them almost like yesterday. And you know, it was after that, as I got older and a little wiser, that you know what, I'm going to get help. If I need help, I'm going to get help. And next time I go through an incident and there's some debriefing, I'm going to go. Not only to help myself, help the other people that are there. They're going to hear, kind of like what your story's about, is to get people to acknowledge that it's okay to get help. I was always thinking, I don't need help. But you got to let it out. You got to talk to someone, because you don't want to go home and tell your wife. You don't want to go tell your friends, because you do, because they always want to hear, how was your shift? Was it bloody? Tell me about the cool stuff. But they don't really grasp it. You could tell them, you could tell them what you saw, and they go, ooh, that's gross. But until they actually see it and see them having agonal breathing with blood coming out of their, I mean, just whatever the scenario is at that time, just it's different than if you explain it to someone, because it's not as gory. I could tell you about a gory call, and if you don't have that experience, you'll go, oh yeah, that's pretty gross. Yeah, how do you do that kind of work? But me saying it to you, I can get you emotional because you've seen stuff like that and you know where I'm coming from. So that's where I think that this is going to be a great thing for other medics or firefighters or police, anyone involved with healthcare. So my advice to the newbies into EMS or patient care is that I think the first thing I would say is that if they have the opportunity after a bad call, go to the very first one. Don't wait like I did. Wait for the 8th or 10th or 9th time or whatever, and go in, because not only will it help you understand what happened and it helps you understand that it's not your fault, and that this is a scenario that we are there to help. And that's kind of where I came up with the understanding that I'm there to help, and bad things happen, and my training is to help, and if they can kind of understand that, I think they can deal with the process a little bit more and understand that this is part of life. This is part of what people go through. And hopefully it's not such a shock. So that's what I would say. I would say that if you're on a traumatic call or anything that semi-bugs you, especially if you have children and you're on a child call, get help. Get help. It's no big deal. It's a kickback environment. Other people are there listening to your story. They want to know what you feel. Even your buddies, they don't know. Maybe they're afraid to talk, but if they hear you talk, they're going to say, you know what, I feel the same way. And then once you get that out, it feels good. It feels really good. You don't feel bottled up. You feel, oh, that wasn't bad. And then you leave there and you can put a smile on your face after this traumatic call. So definitely, I would say, seek help when you can. Well, so I think that if you're involved in EMS long enough, and I've worked with some great companies, had great bosses, that when you work in EMS long enough and you see all this crazy stuff, it makes you a little calloused towards it really can play effect on your relationship with your wife or your friends, your parents, just anything, because you build a shell around you that nobody can touch. And when that happens, then it's not you anymore. It's not Brian. It's this broken down Brian that has this shell on him that, I don't know how to explain that, but that's kind of the best way I can explain it, is that a normal emotion that comes in, even just a love feeling, it might not be the full love butterfly feeling that you would normally have, that a normal person should have. And I think it goes on all the different parts of the brain that respond to the stimuli that you have from different scenarios. One might be, I had a father think his son was the Antichrist. And he was 6 years old, he was sleeping, little boy sleeping, and his dad came in and shoved a knife right through his back. So we get there, the police, the fire guys ran the boy out to me, and he had a knife in the back, and they said, we can't pull the knife out, because protocol says you can't pull the knife out, you got to leave, we can't work on the kid, we can't lay him down, we can't do CPR, we can't cover the wound. So I had to pull the knife out. When I pulled the knife out, I felt the resistance. It didn't come out easy. It was wedged in between his back ribs, maybe even broke the ribs because of the angle that he came in at, because it was this way, not this way. And I just felt the resistance, and I remember getting nauseated when I pulled the knife out. But we put a dressing over him, and I turned him around, and I remember the little boy's face was just completely innocent. It didn't look like he said ow and died with an ow face. He was just a normal sleeping little kid. It looked like he was sleeping. Even when we flipped him over, you really didn't have a clue what happened to him unless you knew. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of blood. But anyway, that little scenario gives you a little shell that something in your life can't get to you. In my book that you looked at, I had a boyfriend-girlfriend fighting over stupid stuff. Teenagers, 17 years old, got mad at her boyfriend, and he was mowing the lawn or he was doing something, and she grabbed his gasoline and doused herself. And I guarantee that not only did she die from her wounds, but I guarantee that if she could look back on what she did, she would have said, what'd I do that for? Kind of like when you have a relationship and you're with somebody and you think, man, this is the love of my life, and all of a sudden they're gone and you're like hurt for months. And then months later you're like, whatever, I don't. And if she could have not done that to herself, she could have looked back on that relationship or that argument, and she could be alive right now and having beautiful kids and traveling the world or something, I don't know. But she let that emotion get to her. So that kind of plays a role in a different part of my brain, maybe, somehow, somewhere, that kind of builds another shell on this arm or this leg or something. So all these little scenarios keep building this stuff, I feel, not just me, just any medic. And then it's, how do you chip that stuff off you? I don't know. I mean, it's my motorcycle riding and my love for my family and me playing with my kids makes a huge difference in my world, for sure.